Let's welcome now Dr. Billy Cook.
And talk to you a little bit about some of the things we're thinking about, some of the things that we're working on, emerging technologies and what's relevant. This is the thing I'm going to start with right here. And it may be the most important thing that I tell y'all all day. There's technologies out there that we're currently not using, so we got to use the technologies that are out there where they're applicable for. So with that, I want to start off with some stuff. How many of you have heard the term Internet of Things? Got 2, 3, 4? That's about what I was hoping for. I heard that terminology a few years ago, and I was like, what are we talking about? I got a definition for you. You know, it's not intuitive for sure. Here's my definition, okay? It's all the stuff that's there and that will be connected to the internet into the future, and how we use those things to help us make decisions. Okay, let's think about that. All the things that are connected to the internet. I would bet every one of you have that capability in your pocket right now. If you don't, you probably won't raise your hand. I mean, you have that capability today to pull out that phone and get on the internet. So that is a hugely dynamic interface of information exchange, isn't it, when we think about it? Just think about what all y'all are talking about. What are you reading? What are you trying to learn information on? And that's all, somewhere that all is taking place on the internet. Gartner Incorporated is kind of one of these futuristic thinking type companies, and they said that in 2016, there'll be 6.4 billion things connected to the internet, with the B, billion. That's up 30% from last year. That's a lot of stuff. They also say by 2020, there'll be 20 billion things. What are we forecasting? Probably by then, 8 billion people. So 2.5 things per person will be hooked to the internet. That's a little dumbfounding for me to try to get my head around. Says that there'll be 6.1 billion cell phones by 2020. If we're saying that's about 8 million people, so over 2/3 of the people are going to have a cell phone across the world. Can't quite comprehend that either. But here's what I'd want you to think about. Think about you carrying your cell phone every day, right? And I just visited with over at the Mesonet. There's 120 Mesonet stations across Oklahoma. Probably, without a doubt, the highest resolution weather information there is anywhere, right? We're very privileged to be in Oklahoma. Now, we have some challenges that probably led to that. We won't talk about why we have so many weather stations. But think, what if this phone, and what you're doing every day, you go out and check cattle. What if in a few years this phone says, relative humidity at my place is this, and the temperature is this, and moisture is this. That's very, very conceivable. That's very, very possible. And all of a sudden, we go from the best weather resolution at 120 units across Oklahoma to, we probably got 200 of them right here. Think about what that could mean if we could draw from just that simple example and capitalize on that and say, hey, we now have such resolution to look at what's happening on so many different locations. Our ability to compute and do things differently are very, very different. It also leads to a concept that you hear a lot thrown out with the Internet of Things that says big data. It's a stimulating topic, right? I mean, big data. The best definition I heard for big data was data you don't have the ability to do something with. If you can handle it, it's not big data. If it gets where you can't handle it, it's big. I don't know if that's right or not, but that's what you begin to see. But what we see is, with all the interconnectivity and all the data that's being created, you have a completely different opportunity to do analysis and learn things. Rolf Iserman, he's an engineer at a university in Germany. And he's using software that immediately identifies and fixes a flaw when things are happening. And his concept is, if I've got enough data and I'm good enough at doing that, my technology will never fail. Now, I know the guys that are here from our operation say, I don't think we're there yet. Our technology seems to fail a lot. We take something and deploy at Austin, and then I get a phone call that, hey, that's not working for us today. He has a term for it. There's a German term for it, and I'm not German, Grindlich. Grindlich means you're doing it really right. And I think that's a very interesting concept to think that we now have enough data, we're developing enough processing capability to fix things before you know they're broke. Interesting concept. So if we think about this, and we got a farm out there, and we think of the things we're interested in soil and forage, and we're interested in wildlife and water and erosion and what things might be happening there, and we're probably interested in cattle and forage, right? You don't usually see the Internet of Things and big data discussion presented in this scenario. But that's what we're very interested in, okay? Why we think we're uniquely positioned to be in some of this area is, if you saw one of the little advertisements that was up here earlier, Noble Foundation celebrating our 70th anniversary this year. And for most of that time, we've been doing these things right here. We've been working with producers. So I think through those relationships, we have a very strong idea of the things that are really important to you. You tell us, you tell our consultants. Those have become the targets that we're keenly interested in working toward. You know, it's got to be a purposeful outcome at the end of all this hocus pocus technology that you as a producer have an opportunity to use. And we know that's a hard sell because we already aren't using all the technologies that's out there. But this world will continue to change, and we need to stay abreast of it. So we think there's an opportunity for us to work here. We have to think about, and let's boil this down to what agriculture is in this part of the country, and it's forage-based beef cattle production by and large, right? I mean, that's why we're here. We have the Texoma Cattlemen Conference. We know that's a very dynamic system, right? You got soil interacting with plants and animals interacting with plants and interacting with the soil, and that's quite a dynamic system. We've historically been challenged with looking at that system in its complexity. I'm pretty good at picking out one little bitty piece and studying it to death. And then you're like, what else are you going to tell me, right? I know all about that already, and go on to something else. But it's a system, and I think we really have to begin to recognize if we're going to truly adopt technology that has value, we have to look at it from a systems approach. First thing in this system of forage-based beef and then stewardship of that resource we think about is forage, right? We talk about forages here, and this is just a simple January through December time frame, and when we see the predominance of growth of different forages. Native range we know is a very complex, many different components, and what you would expect is a lot of things are growing at different times. And if we get out of January and February and maybe a little dip here, there's stuff out there. And there are native range operations that do very little supplementation if they're managed very well. So this probably comes as close as anything because it's many different species making up this complex. And then we look at improved or introduced species like the blue stems, Bermuda grass, weeping love grass, crabgrass. All of those are warm seasons, all warm season perennials. And as you'd expect, when it starts warming up, we get some growth. We typically get dry in August, and that growth kind of is depressed. Then we get a little bit of rain. You know, everybody banks on that September 1 rain, dust in your wheat, right? We get a little bit of rain, and we get a little bump in forage production. But when we get out here, we have void. You know, the summer, the warm season quits producing. Then we go to things that are more cool season oriented, like our fescues, ryegrass, our small grains. And they have a place too. But the point is, there are holes, right? There are pieces in this growth curve of all of these species, there's a hole. And if there's a hole there, it means I'm not growing forage. And it probably means if I haven't stockpiled it, I'm bringing it in as hay, right? You know, Chuck taught me well, you know, hay's like the devil. Most terrible thing there ever was, right? You know, hay is bad, costs you money, got to put it up, all those kind of things. So the first thing I want to introduce to you is the idea at the Noble Foundation, we're very sensitive to that idea. A little over 2 years ago now, with Bill Buckner's leadership, he said, we should align our resources better. We have a very, very unique set of scientific resources at the Noble Foundation, and we can work from very basic to very applied. And we kind of, what I said before, we kind of would get pretty focused and do our thing because we wanted to do that. We were kind of that way. So we put this challenge in front of us and said, if we could deploy all of these resources, could we begin to get at this year-round grading for the southern Great Plains? You know, we've picked 4 species where we have expertise and we think they have value for this part of the country, and those are alfalfa, wheat, tall fescue, and Bermuda grass. I would venture to guess every one of you in here have some of this unless you're 100% native range, maybe combinations thereof. And we took our expertise, which is represented here, across, really, when you start listening, a pretty broad expanse of subject matter. Most of them are related to forages and biology and animals, and said, all right, you guys, as a collective whole, where are some things that we need to look at if we're going to begin to impact this available forage year-round? And there are things like plant growth and development, how things respond to drought or nitrogen, low input ag. What if, what if I can grow Bermuda grass with less nitrogen? What if I can have an alfalfa that requires less water? Those really compelling what ifs that maybe through science and the advancement of technology are possible. Things like the breeder's toolbox. We have breeders that have so many tools at their disposal, not unlike some of the things Dr. Thalman visited with you earlier, but applied in a plant perspective as opposed to an animal. There are many, many of those things, and if we can get those aligned so a breeder can go and look at multiple pieces of information on something that he's trying to manage or predict or modify, then that's a time saver. So this idea of a breeder's toolbox. Obviously, the plant-animal interaction, our bailiwick, if you will, from an ag division perspective. But in addition to that plant-animal interaction, there's that plant-microbe interaction. And that brings in this concept that soil is hugely important. And there are microbes out there that positively impact different plants, negatively impact animals. How do we put those together in a complementary fashion? Project areas in this 365 effort are things like cotton root rot, endophyte, and tall fescue. Tall fescue would be great if we could grow a lot of it out here predictably. Well, we had a cool season perennial, so my perennial option isn't always something I've got to plant as a small grain. Root architecture, how does that impact perhaps resistance to drought or water use, nitrogen use efficiency, that idea that what if we can find plants that don't use as much nitrogen to produce the same or more amount of forage. Not unlike we talk about in animals. We know there are animals out there that are much more efficient at taking in forage and converting it into product. The same thing exists within plants. And there's probably more opportunity to modify those pathways and make things more promising for us going forward. We talked about breeder's toolbox and grazing systems, whether that's cow-calf stockers and the idea of introduction of cover crops into these systems. Water use efficiency. We had it. When you get 80 inches of rainfall, you don't worry so much about water use efficiency, but we didn't have to think very far back when we had 24 or 25. And then phosphorus acquisition and use. So we have multiple projects around these ideas back home in the lab, and we're working on them. And that's what I want you to know. We're about year 1.25 into this project, and many things are happening here. So you can envision a time when we'll come back in here and say, hey, here's some stuff that we've come up with from a technology perspective that ultimately may have impact to your operation. So I wanted to take just an example of how do we approach this technology deal and some of the paths that we've taken. This is our Oswalt property down south and a little bit west of here. This represents about 5,200 acres. And the yellow boundaries, if you look, there's 6 of them. And those are 600 to 800 acre grazing paddocks, pretty big grazing paddocks, right? And pretty rough old country if you've been down that part of the counties. A lot of terrain change, all native grass, a lot of brush encroachment, tough country. And if you look close, there's 92 different yellow dots on here. If I wanted to implement a project on here, and the hypothesis I had was I'm going to impact species composition or I'm going to impact quantity of a particular species, then how would I measure that over time? Whether it's due to fire or grazing or some other management aspect, it doesn't really matter. But how do I measure that change? The way that we started this project now 7 years ago is we established 92 of these little yellow dots randomly. And there's a 100-meter transect identified there. And what we get to do is you take a quadrat and you take a pair of clippers and you put the quadrat down and you get on your knees and you clip all the forage, put it in a sack, take it home, dry it, separate it out by species and weigh it. Pretty accurate. To do that, the number of times, we do it about twice a year now, about 30 weeks of work. So if you got lots of labor and lots of time, it works. You're doing large expanses of land, it's a labor killer. So what else could we do? One of the technologies out there is called the rising plate meter. It's pretty simplistic, and it's about a 15-inch plate that's on a stick. And when I put that in forage, the plate floats above at some level on the forage, and I take that change in distance as a measurement that I record, and I've got some little adjustment factors that say if I'm in small grains, multiply all of these numbers by X, and it'll give me an idea of forage availability out there currently. So instead of having to get down, it doesn't tell me much about species composition, but it does a very good job of telling me how much is out there. What else? Well, I got tired of walking around with my little stick, right? So our guys said, what could we do that's more automated? So we created this little forage sled, and it's really a pretty simple idea. This is just a little tongue or flap, if you will, that moves, connected to a little rod here that goes in here and uses a very, very simple piece of technology to say, how far is this thing moving, depending on how much it compresses the forage, right? So I just drive my four-wheeler around there and come back, and it gives me a pretty good idea of what my forage availability is. I like that pretty good, and it's a pretty good approach. There's some tweaks with it. It's heavy, those kind of things, but it's a lot better than me getting down and clipping quadrats. But again, this tells me how much and not what, right? If we want to start getting at that idea of what, one of the approaches we've taken over the last several years is what we call very large-scale aerial photography. Somebody will get in this little plane, this ultralight, and there's several different resolutions of cameras. And there's a little program behind that says, at each one of these X's as you're flying, take a picture. With all three of those cameras, I have various different resolution, and it looks something like this. But remember, we had a hard time seeing the 92 yellow dots. I'm not exactly sure how many red X's that is, but rest assured the resolution's higher, right? Number of observations is more. Well, here's one of the lower resolution images on just a represented area on that Oswald property. And you can kind of tell how much ground cover we have and that there's some difference in species. You know, like the higher resolution, we can say, well, yeah, that's definitely little blue stem. And so we have a capability then from a manned air vehicle, fly that, collect the data, and through some process, and what we've historically used is cheap labor, either grad student or summer kid, and say, go through this and help us analyze what's there. The idea would be, can we do that from a technological perspective so it's just automated? Send a photo through there and tell me an idea. That's possible, but it takes a while, okay? So what we know is we have to pay this guy to come down here, and if it's too windy, he doesn't fly. And I mean, it kind of scared me a little when he gets in the air. I don't know. I guess if he crashes, that's his deal. I don't want him to crash on us. So another option is this UAV technology. You know, this looks like a toy, right? It truly looks like a toy. It's about this big. We've just bought this unit. We've gone through umpteen different iterations of the government regulation to get certified to fly it, and it looks like a toy. What makes it not a toy is whatever we hang on it, right? What is the sensor we can hang on there that tells me something interesting? We can do some of the same very large-scale application here from just the resolution of photography. We can look at NDVI, and we can look at spectrometers, and we can look at color differences, and all of a sudden that gets pretty interesting to think about. And if I can have it on this plane and deploy it and tell it to go and come back when you're done, that's pretty interesting to us. One of the things we've done here is where we've used this UAV technology, we contracted it out before we owned our own unit. This is a pivot, 120-acre pivot down at Red River Farm, and it has a 4-year-old stand of alfalfa and a 2-year-old stand of alfalfa. And if you've grown alfalfa, I got an issue here, right? Everybody know what we're seeing? Cotton root rot. We knew we'd get cotton root rot. We farm it to make alfalfa to feed all of our cattle, but we knew we'd have this issue. But we're interested in looking at that and what are some resolutions we can possibly undertake. So with that UAV, we're able to fly this and geomap this area, and then we'll fly it again and see how much it's expanded, so we can get an idea of the disease front interface and what's happening. We've got very good representation of where we have the disease present. We're going to rotate this out of alfalfa for a year, and against my better judgment, we're going to plant it right back into alfalfa so that we can begin to apply some of these potential treatments to the areas that we know have the disease. So kind of an application of that technology, if you will. Now, we talked about forage availability and measuring that forage and knowing what's out there, and it's huge to the direction we want to go on this whole forage animal systems efficiency work. We have now an employee, as this PhD project was working with some professors at OSU, and he is very, very interested in the different sensors that are available and what their application would be to measure forage. And he made us a box. Well, that's cool, right? A good looking box. The thing that's interesting about this box is it has 3 different sensors mounted on it. It has a radiometer, and that tells you kind of what the color of that plant is. It's got 2 lasers, and it's got an ultrasound. And between the lasers, the laser kind of tells me, is there forage present or not, and how, this is bare, this is not, this is bare, this is not, and keeps up with that. And then the ultrasound kind of tells you how much forage. So with Josh's work and a lot of data that he's collected, he's got this little standalone box now that we can put on the front of a tractor or the front of a golf cart or whatever the thing is. And through the algorithms he's created, we can get a very good idea. We can correlate at over 80% the measurement he's getting with my get on my knees with the quadrat and a clipper and clip that forage data. This is cool. This is something that we say, this might be a deliverable that we have in the pipeline somewhere that's going to have some value to you guys. The thing, we have enough confidence in this equipment. We've historically done small grain variety tests. I bet some of you here have gotten a report. Look at the current varieties of small grains and how they're comparing against other varieties, right? How did we measure that? Yes, our friend, the quadrat and clippers. That's a destructive measurement, right? So I had to have one plot that I didn't destroy, one that I did to measure the forage and the grain yield. We're confident enough in this equipment, we're using it to measure our forage yield without destroying the plant. That's a pretty big step. That is very intriguing. So we kind of went down this whole path of how technology evolved and how we've used it from a forage measurement perspective. That's one piece of the puzzle, right? What we grow. Another piece of the puzzle is what eats it and how's that animal perform. And so let's look at that just a little bit. What things are we interested in from a technology perspective on our animals? We can hang these GPS units on whatever kind of livestock or wildlife we have and get a whole lot better idea of what their behavior and their movement is and what their location is. In fact, if you watch this little movie, we'll start right here on this blue line. This is basically connecting 2-minute fixes of this steer that's out here grazing. So every 2 minutes, we draw a little piece of this line. So let's watch what happens. See him right here, he's out wandering, right? Right here he wandered, and then you see all those different directions? Had his head down and grazing, right? So from these GPS measurements, we can get a good idea what this animal's doing. Here he's traveling for some reason. Looks like he's getting over here, and this red line is a doe. This is late May, so I suspect this doe's heavy with fawn, and she's not wanting to move much. You can see over the same time the steer is moving a lot, this doe doesn't move a lot. But somehow or another, it really looks like he gets over here and spooks her, doesn't it? I don't know what's going on there, but she left the scene and then came right back. Do you see that? But the point is, you want to know what the interaction is between cattle and deer? This is pretty cool. This can tell me some of those things. So, and the other thing we can do is, we said we were connecting the dots of where that animal was here for 2 minutes ago and currently and 2 minutes from now, right? We just drew that line. That's what we saw previously. This slide represents all the fixes of the animals we had with GPS collars on this Oswald property that we had. And we said this is about 3,800 acres. And so every 5 minutes we took a fix where that animal was. And we put every one of them on this little map. And I'm not real astute at interpreting this, but it looks like there's something better here than here, right? And when we start talking about grazable acres and how much, I think this is 600 and some odd acres. We assigned it all as grazable. We would be way overstocking that unit, wouldn't we? Because over a 90-day period, they rarely use some of this area, very rarely. So again, location and behavior is something that we're very interested in, and we're going down that path of the technology that helps us know those things. The other thing that is very critical is we start getting an idea of this forage efficiency, forage animal efficiency complex, is having better weight of the animal. If I manage everything by weight, and if I can know it more often, then I can do a better job of management. And that's absolutely the case. Whether it's this GrowSave unit that measures front half body weight of those animals, or this is another picture of Twain's unit that they put together, the walkover platform. Instead of knowing the weight of an animal when I turn him out, and maybe if I'm really, really aggressive, I'll bring him back in and weigh him every 2 weeks, right? That would be represented with these little diamonds. I measured him here, and I measured him here, and I measured him here. It's a pretty aggressive weigh schedule actually on this project. But imagine drawing the line that said the growth response for this whole period was from here to here, straight line here to here, straight line here, straight line here. Now, when we can populate that with daily body weights of that animal, look at the resolution we get. We put them on, and this was actually in a backgrounding. If you look this early, late, that's 2 phases of a backgrounding period. And those cattle did pretty well. You can see there was a little dip here. I think that's probably somewhere in December, and I'm guessing it was a weather event. And then those cattle just keep trucking right along, right? In that precondition period, they got on feed, and they're putting on weight. And what do we do as managers? We take them out of where they're doing so well, and we throw them on pasture, small grains pasture. Well, what happened right here? This is in kilograms, and I'm guessing that's about 20 kilograms or 50 pounds that animal lost as I transitioned him from some sort of mixed ration or packaged feed onto small grain. How many stocker operators like to lose 50 pounds? We don't like to lose any, right? But we've suspected that all along, right? That these cattle that rumen needs the opportunity to adjust to a new feed stuff. This gives us the resolution to go in here, and it's one of the projects Brian and Evan are working on, and said, what can we do from a management perspective to mitigate this drop? I would rather start my growth curve on small grains here and not here. Everybody okay with that? Anybody want to start here? So maybe that's something we can bring back to you as we go forward and understand what some mitigations may be to help you adjust that. And we run these cattle through a typical grazing period, and what do we do right here? I pulled them off. What do I do with them? I put them back on a concentrated feed ration. What did the rumen do? Say, whoa, I don't know how much that is either, but let's just say it's another 50 pounds. So over a period of whatever that might be, let's just say 150 days, and we hope that animal gains 2.5 a day. I set him back 50 pounds here and 50 pounds here. I don't really want to do that often, do it? And we do it every day. In the stocker cattle business, we do it every day. So that's one of the targets that we're looking at to try to look at some management strategies, hopefully a very simple management strategy that you don't have to have a lot of technology to know what's happening. We have the technology. We try to come up to optimize a management strategy to say, let's make that better. So that's an example. The other thing that we're doing the whole time we're collecting this is we're using one of those forage measurement tools and measuring how much forage is there and how much is disappearing, and is that impacting body weight gain? So that's kind of an example down a couple of different paths of things that we're interested in and where we deploy technologies. Now this was a slide to catch us up, okay? I like the slide. We talked about a whole world of technology out there in front of us, many of it not even potentially targeted towards agriculture, but it's there. That needs to be a target for us. We need to investigate what's there. And I don't care if it's in the energy world. Does it have application in the ag world? Are we creative enough to find where it does and deploy it? So lots of technology. With that technology becomes a lot of interconnectivity with this internet, right? Internet brings it all together in a pile that if we're smart enough, we can learn from it, take this big data and analyze it uniquely and learn things that we've never learned before. We're particularly interested in year-round grazing, forage and animal response in different systems. So that's where we're kind of targeting. So I've kind of been all over the board, but I wanted to catch us up of kind of the way we're progressing through this story, okay? We can't talk about this without talking about soil. The Noble Foundation was founded on the concept that the soil, we as producers have not done a good job of taking care of the soil, and our founder wanted to resolve some of that. And through some of the work that has happened early in the Noble Foundation and some of the work within RCS and conservation districts and others, we've done a pretty good job of some of the big issues we had with erosion and topsoil loss. And so we kind of went on. And then we circled back around, primarily due to Bill's interest, and said, what's happening below the soil? What do we do to the soil? What do you do to your soil? Plow it, maybe put a little fertility on it. But we really don't know what's happening under that soil. We know that's a whole different complex, a whole different system than we've really ever given credit to. So we come up with this idea in 2013 between the Farm Foundation and the Noble Foundation, and they called it Soil Renaissance. It's reawakening of awareness of soil. And with the idea they wanted to do research, measurement, do the economics and education relative to really what's happening there in the soil health arena. In mid-December, we announced the launch of the Soil Health Institute. It's a virtual center targeted at addressing just these things from a soil perspective. That brings the other piece of the puzzle, right? Plant, animal, soil. So all of a sudden, we've kind of got this thing circled. What we know through the time that we've spent over multiple decades working with you guys is, what is the value proposition of all this stuff in a real world setting? If it don't make money, it doesn't do something for you, then we're just spinning our wheels. We're playing with toys, frankly. So that's our target, and we're very much focused on that. We have to absolutely understand the true economic value in what can be brought to you as a producer. And I think that's one of the things that we're pretty always in tune to. We're always very sensitive to. You know, we've been approached with some opportunities, and I'll kind of say, I don't see this ever working, do you? No, but it'd be cool. I said, well, somebody else can play with cool. We want to make it work with you, for you as producers. To do those things, as we go down this path, we're learning a lot. And as you think about really doing systems work on forages, you have to have a pretty unique resource to do that. If I want to put multiple forages together for year-round grazing, that's a complex grazing paddock setup, I promise you. Today, currently, every grazing facility that we have, every paddock we have is allocated. So we've been planning this strategy for a while, and through the graciousness of our board, they approved this project. This is our Red River farm down in Love County in the bend of the Red River. It's about 33 or 400 acres. This all colored up piece is a full section of land. And our plans here are to put in somewhere around 144 4-acre grazing paddock where you can deploy the 4 species of interest. We had Bermuda grass, small grains, fescue, and alfalfa. And start looking at this system so that we can do the work that says, hey, if you're interested in more of a year-round system, we have some work here that would demonstrate you may want to do X, Y, or Z, okay? So what we know is this is up on the river and it's pretty sandy. It works good for 3 of the 4 species. We had to go down below the hill here and found some some ground that's a little more conducive to fescue. But in a couple-year period, maybe we can have one of these discussions out there, Hugh, that says, this is a facility we put together for this reason, and it's what we're beginning to learn. There certainly is a long-term commitment to this area from the Noble Foundation. It's sort of a commercial for you right now. I don't have a lot of take-home results today, but know what's in the process and know what we're interested in doing as we go forward. So what is our formula to make technology work for you guys? It's got to be producer-derived outcomes, right? We've talked about that. We have to focus on what our expertise is. I'm not so interested in doing confined feeding efficiency because we're not in the feed yard business. I'm not so interested in dairy cattle because there's not a lot of dairy cattle here. We're very interested in forage-based beef cattle production. So therefore, that's one of our expertise. This scenario we think can have impact. We're going to go that way. With technology, I should have put a lot of commas in here and repeated this. You deploy it and you learn, and you deploy it and you learn. Sometimes you deploy it and throw it away, but it's an iterative process that you have to take something that probably wasn't made for the application you're going to use it in, put it there and learn what it takes to make it better. And then what really becomes interesting is when you combine multiple pieces of that technology that are interesting in different ways to help you tell different pieces of the story of that systems approach. Combining interesting technologies and taking novel approaches to the solution. We have to think out of the box, and that's one of the things that's absolutely critical. We have to understand the true economic value, and then ongoing commitment. Collaborate. You cannot do this kind of stuff by yourself. No entity can. You bring the expertise from wherever it may exist, put it together, put as creative of minds as you can together, and say, let's go about this in a novel approach. And I'm 100% biased, but we have the best staff there is, whether it's from an operational perspective, whether it's a consultant, whether it's our researchers. That staff is what makes it happen, because you add all the complications of deploying technology, and these are guys who are out there laying on their ear in the mud, wiring something up. They're saying, come on, guys. But they do it, and because they understand why and what the commitment is going forward. I'll leave you with this because I think it exactly illustrates the opportunity that we have and why we're pursuing this. That's all I have for you. I do appreciate your time. Thank you very much.